Hello, hello. This is John with gringo.dev. Today I have something that I am pretty excited to show you guys. So I'm going to give you the quick summary here, and then I'm going to talk a lot more about it and how I built everything. But this is stoic.gringo.dev, or more friendly, the Stoic Developer. It's a little podcast that I am creating in every possible way. Podcast isn't quite the right word, as I'm going to go into in a second, but it's basically me narrating classic passages of Stoic philosophy. So getting into why a little bit, I'm going to show you guys the README from the public repo, which you can go check out. It's gringo.dev/stoic podcast. I'll link it in the description. But I haven't talked too much about myself on the channel, which maybe I should. But summary is I worked in Silicon Valley for a long time. I was a pretty early employee at LinkedIn and Carvana and some other places, and I was lucky enough to do well enough to retire. And I tried earlier and always came back because I felt like I needed something to do. I just never took the time to really figure out my place in the world. And yeah, after the most recent attempt, I decided, you know what, I need to find something more meaningful to do with my life instead of just passing the time. And I won't claim I have everything figured out, but I did find Stoic philosophy in the tradition of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and others to be a really useful tool, philosophical tool in that vein. So I decided I would combine a few of my interests into a project that we can work on together on my channel here. And so the idea is that I'm going to be narrating these ancient texts, or maybe not so ancient. There's some modern stuff too, but I'm going to be starting with Aurelius and Seneca and some others. And that's going to help me get a lot closer to the source material and help my understanding more than anything. And I'd say like that's probably my primary priority with all of this. But in the process, I'd like to help other people too. And I think to the extent that you guys can get some value out of listening to those, whether it's for meditative purposes or whatever, that's awesome. But also, I just have this strong instinct and desire to build. And there's all sorts of cool technology coming out that I want to build with. So just off the top of my head, there's Livewire, Volt, Folio, and many others that were just announced by Taylor at Laracon. And, so I want to build, but I also want it to be meaningful. And so the thought was, okay, why don't I just create a platform that I can use to learn about new technology, share how it's built, help others, and then maybe people can connect to some of the same stuff I found useful for my own life. And better yet, if I open source it and you guys can learn from it and maybe even use it as a starter for your own podcast software or whatever, it can be great in that sense too. So I'm really hoping that this turns into something that is useful for other people. But the beautiful thing about doing stuff for the right reason is that even if I'm the only one who uses it or finds it valuable, it still served its purpose, So anyway, I'm going to share the link to this so you guys can check it out. And I'm going to go through the code for how all of this works and some of the roadmap and things that I have planned for this as well. So first things first, we're going to go into the commits here. And the attempt was to organize these in such a way that you can kind of understand step by step how to set up a project like this and understand all the pieces fit together. So candidly, a lot of it is just going to be project setup, installing Laravel Breeze. I'll talk through some of the basic parts just so you know about them and are aware, and then I'd suggest you go to the Laravel documentation to check them out in more detail. The interesting stuff is going to come in the implementation of some of the new stuff like Folio and Volt, which I'm going to get to as soon as I can. So just very quickly, after setting up Laravel, it was kind of my framework of choice when I don't have a strong reason to do something different. You can use Breeze for basic auth scaffolding, so user creation and login. Livewire, which is sort of PHP for the front end, even though it's technically using JS under the covers, it's something that you don't really have to concern yourself with too much. Laravel strict mode, which is just a helpful check. It causes Laravel to fail loudly when it should. Octane, specifically with Roadrunner, which is a way of making the same code in Laravel run many, many, many times faster. So you can squeeze a lot more out of like a DigitalOcean droplet, for example. Folio, which is file-based routing in the spirit of Next.js or Nuxt.js or what have you, but for Laravel, super cool. The episodes model, which I'll dig into right now, as well as Filament for the admin panel. So I'm going to touch on the structure of the data real fast. So you can see that the episode model is really basic. We have, and this is sort of our container for the audio that I'm narrating. So we have a title, file path, a file name, which is auto-generated by the admin panel, and a transcript. And that's pretty much it. So this helper here for the permissions just checks to see if somebody is an admin. That's a simple, are they this specific user or not? It's this kind of MVP software. The migration, and that's pretty much it. I do have a seeder set up here so that if you run the migrate fresh with seed Laravel command, you get 10 episodes and an admin user just to make local dev a little bit easier. So nothing too complicated there. The admin panel, I'm going to touch on this real briefly, and I can show you guys this as well. But it's so ridiculously easy to get something very powerful set up with Filament. So with Filament here, we have, less than 100 lines of code. And actually, a lot of that was generated for me. And it's just, you just put in some basic commands here, and you have, a CRUD admin panel for whatever you want with file upload and like all of this stuff. I'll show you how it works, but it's really quite impressive how much you can get done with so little effort, And honestly, it makes me feel kind of like these, it's almost like Firebase, It's like it's so incredibly easy to get set up and be productive. But unlike Firebase, you're actually set up for the future, and you have things like relational databases and great ways to test and like all of these other things, a full powered backend, one of the most powerful backends you can have. And it just works out of box. You can grow into anything that you might hypothetically need in the future. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a shame more people don't use Laravel, even though it is very popular, just because I think if they kept an open mind to PHP, which candidly I did not have until maybe like a year and a half ago. I wish I had discovered Laravel earlier in my life. That's all I can say, because it makes stuff so ridiculously easy. In any case, I'm starting to rant, so let's get back on topic. Probably the most interesting commit to look at here is this one. Don't get crafty and try to use my my little token here because I have already changed it. But anyway, you'll run a command to set that for yourself. So the most interesting thing in this is starting with the actual web code. So you'll notice if you go through this commit, there is no entry in a routes file. There is no controller. Why? Because we're using Laravel Folio. Laravel Folio lets us just have a file-based component. So this is the root, and this is the controller. So basically, this is my root for the entire project, and it just knows that based on the position in this folder here, pages. And I can do things like set up a named root using some of the helpers. So the only gotcha to be aware of here is that this initial PHP template block is only accessible to configuration for Folio. So you can see here, it's actually a good example. So I have some setup going on for Folio, and then I have some other just setup that I need to do for my page. And because this is not related to Folio, I had to extract it out into a blade directive for PHP, which is just sort of a minor annoyance, I guess, not a big deal. But anyway, let's focus on the cooler part, which is just how powerful this is. So you can see, like, I have full co-location here. So this is already just a fully routable component. And then on top of it, I can pull all of the episodes from my database and just load them directly in the file. Now, to all of the people out there who are going to say that's bad architecture, whatever, I understand. But this is a very simple project. I want to get it out the door quickly. Like, think if you're a startup, like trying to do an MVP or something like that. Being able to save time and just co-locate stuff and understand exactly what's going on at a glance is like super powerful and helpful, right? I wouldn't necessarily architect things if this was an enterprise application, but as far as a quick and dirty prototype, let's call it, it's really quite handy. And when I say quick and dirty, like, look, I'm throwing just a one-off layout directly inside this file, starting at the HTML root. It's not like I'm trying to do things in like the theoretically perfect manner. Here, it was partly just to see how quickly could I do it, and it turns out that it's actually every bit as fast as something like Firebase. So that's super cool in my opinion. But yeah, so I load the episodes in a normal way, and I just pass them through to Livewire one by one as parameters. So let's take a look here. You'll notice that I have just one file for my Livewire component. That's thanks to Volt. And Volt, again, it's sort of in the same spirit as Folio. So you have a single file component here for Livewire. I don't have to separate, I don't have to extract out a separate file with a separate class. You can use a class in here if you want to, so just have a class-based component. So it's it's really up to you how you want to structure things. I was kind of curious to just try stuff in that functional style, like you would find with React hooks or Vue 3 composition API or something like that. So that's what I went with here. It's super cool, I have to say. So just to talk through it real fast, here I'm just declaring a parameter, which is episode. And by marking it reactive, I'm saying that if the parameter for episode were ever to change on the parent, that would trigger a re-render of this component as well. So Livewire by default has an island model where things don't re-render by default, and that's the save on the network traffic to synchronize state, which I think is a reasonable default. So just be aware that if you want things to change in response to parameters, you're planning to change parameters on the parent, you may want to add this along. I'm not actually doing that, but I just added that in for illustrative purposes here. And then you have your state variables. So in this case, we have expanded, which defaults to false. That's for showing the full transcript or no in each tile. And then the teaser length before we trigger that show more, show less button. And then here, very similar to Vue 3 composition API, we have a computed function. And so exceeds teaser length is just a way of saying yes or no. Is this long enough to trigger require having a button to show more or show less? And so since it depends on these state variables here, we wrap it in the computed function. And lastly, this is super cool. We have the download file action. And so this is backend code again in a closure. And same as you would in a controller, except directly right here in your component, you can just call exactly what you would in your controller, right? So on this disk, the public disk, I want you to download this episode. And so this is in response to the download button here. You can see that I'm invoking this action on click, and it'll just trigger HTTP response with that file on click. So this is super cool. And for this kind of stuff where you don't need to share a ton of code between different parts of the system, whatever, like it's super powerful and like really easy to get stuff going. So again, it's like if you're ever considering one of these lightweight solutions, like Firebase, where the trade-off is you get going fast, but in the long run, it kind of screws you because you have bad practices. Laravel is super cool. I think a compelling option with all of this, simply because it's this fast to get started. I mean, literally, it's as fast as something like Firebase, but you can evolve into whatever degree of, let's call it capability that you need in the future, right? So the rest is like pretty straightforward. I think the one thing to talk about here is, I think this is an architectural change between Livewire 2 and 3. And by the way, I'm not a Livewire expert. Like this is version 3, and it's pretty much the first version that I've ever used in Anger, let's say. But my understanding of how that architecture works is you declare state on the server. So this is all running in the server in PHP. And so then when it hydrates the client via Alpine.js, and Alpine.js is sort of the JavaScript substrate for all of these Livewire components now. Before it was like a related library, now it's the foundation of Livewire. So Alpine.js will hydrate this wire object that will contain the state that you initialized here and maintain that state as it changes. So unlike Livewire 2, Livewire 3 is sort of opt in to synchronization as opposed to opt out of synchronization with the server. And so what that means is it's a little bit easier to, with this sort of magic wire object, you can just sort of manage a lot of stuff on the client very easily. So you can see Alpine ships with Livewire by default. So I'm able to do things like without having to do any complicated includes or NPM dependency management, anything like that. I just say, okay, respond to this event. When clicked, negate the value on expanded. And then in response to whatever that value is, I can decide exactly what I show, whether it's the full transcript or not, and whether it's the expand or contract button, right? Show more, show less. And what's cool is by doing it this way, I don't have any network traffic with the server. But if I ever did want to synchronize with the server, for example, I needed to consume this value in a handler or something, at the point of synchronizing with the server, the updated value would get passed along. And so this is not a great example of where that would be useful, but where I could see it being useful is something like analytics for some. So let's say that I want to log events to my backend. And so I'm going to hit an endpoint like /track or something, which is probably an open source package I'm going to do for Laravel here in the near future. But you can imagine that you're fully content to handle things this way on the client. And not have any network traffic, but there might be a moment where you want everything to sync. And what's cool about Livewire is that whatever the current state is at the next moment where it synchronizes with the server from basically any event, the current state will get passed along. And so in this package that I'm thinking about building, the way I would probably do it is I just have an endpoint and I would log by default everything that's sort of on this wire package, which should be up to date at the point that it gets sent to the server. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds, I guess. Like you can very easily set and consume properties off this wire object, which are fundamentally initialized and then later managed and synchronized on the server. So I don't know if that super makes sense, but it kind of made more sense as I was going through it. So I encourage you to like look at this code, play with it, and then see if it makes sense to you as well. But anyway, bottom line, this is super cool, and that's basically it. You know, like a lot of this stuff is just assets and like everything else. I mean, fundamentally, we have a very basic page here to list all of the episodes. We have an episode tile here, which is a Livewire component. And we're doing some very basic state management. We can initiate downloads, like all of that stuff, and it just works. And you can end up here. This is going to have the list of all of the episodes and everything else. And so I'm going to add pagination. I'm going to add some localization to Spanish. I'll probably add analytics. So what's cool about this is it's going to be a process, and like we can do it together, right? And like every time I need to add something for my own purposes, I'll document it, I'll push the code, and hopefully we can all start learning how to use old technology or new technology together. And maybe it'll be the fountain of some new stuff that you guys want to do creatively as well. So a couple other notes. If you guys want to see the admin panel, this is what you got with that minimal code in Filament. So this is a Filament PHP admin panel. And you can see here, I already have, this is just the default UI too. It looks great. I have sort of this CRUD interface that I configured, and it's really more configuration than coding, but it's super powerful, like ridiculously powerful. In fact, one thing I didn't do this time, but I'm going to, is I'm going to make this a rich text input so that you get nice formatting. I didn't do it for this sort of initial release, but again, that's the nice part about releasing and iterating. But this is so ridiculously easy to set up. You have file upload if you want it, so I can edit a file here, or if I do a new episode, you can drag and drop and like do whatever you want. So I mean, stuff is just not particularly hard, but just annoying to build. It's such a delight moment as a developer when something comes along and it just makes your life that easy. And again, if we go back to the code here, let's see. You can see that at the installation, the configuration. Yeah, so this is pretty much it. So to do basic CRUD on a model with a lot of validation and like drag and drop file input, everything, it's just, this is it. It's so ridiculously productive. So anyway, huge fan of Filament. Sure. One note, by the way, if you're going to clone the repo and use it, just make sure that you adjust these helpers to whatever needs that you have. I just added a very quick isAdmin helper here, which just checks to see if it's the email address I expect. And then, this is pretty much just a pass through to that. Can access panel is a method that is invoked via the Filament user interface, and just to see if there's access to the admin panel. So yeah, anyway, this is was all very fun to build. So yeah, like I'm going to do more work on this. I'm going to start recording episodes from different like classics over time, probably several a week. And just for context there, I mean, I thought this was kind of cool too, and I may go into my process a little bit more in the near future. So Project Gutenberg has all of this stuff in the public domain. And I mean, it's not unexpected, right? Like Marcus Aurelius died, like 1700 years ago or something like that. So of course, all of his work is public domain. But some of these translations that are available on Gutenberg, I mean, they're great, but they're a little bit sort of archaic English in some sense. They're using words like thou and like whatever else. And so I just went to ChatGPT and I was like, hey, here's the passage that I want to read. How about you modernize the English for me a little bit? And it came out really good. Like the original intent and feeling is there, but it sounds a little bit more like if Marcus Aurelius were alive today and, just my wise grandfather, how maybe he would talk, right? So this is actually the version that I narrated if you go back to the site. And it's HTML5 audio, so you can just play it right in your browser, like so. You can also download it here. anyway, and as I do new episodes, they're gonna show up here. So anyway, I mentioned a few things I want to work on. I'll probably add like user accounts, the ability to favorite stuff, whatever. Definitely some analytics so I can understand how people are using it, but my analytics, so privacy is respected, and everything else. And I'm hoping that this becomes my motivation to then do a lot of cool open source packages and stuff, partly just for my own enjoyment, but partly to help the community too. And I'm really excited more than anything. Like, I think this is going to be a fun project. And like I've said, several times now in this video, I'm just hoping that it's useful to people. So anyway, you can check out the first episode here. It's stoic.gringo.dev. I'm going to leave a link to the GitHub repo in the description, but it's gringo.dev, stoic-podcast. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. As I do more features, I'll talk through how I'm building those exactly, and also talk through some of my process as far as recording, how I'm using ChatGPT, stuff of that nature. And, maybe even, I might do a separate channel for this, but even just like interpretation about the philosophy itself and things of that nature. So in any case, I'm going to stop there because this is getting a little bit long already. But, I've mentioned this before. I mean, I'm not in this for the money, the whole YouTube thing. I don't really want to be an influencer. It's mostly just because I have a lot of knowledge. I want to share it. And more than anything, it's starting to give me some meaning in my life and be fun and something to look forward to. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind, please like, please subscribe, please comment. And I enjoy interacting with everybody who's on here. And I hope that you're getting some value out of it and enjoying these videos as much as I enjoy making them. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way through, leave me a comment if you have thoughts, and I will definitely be in touch with updates on this because it is too exciting to let go. Anyway, have a great day.